The sirens pierced the tranquil morning air like a slap to the face. I stood barefoot on my porch, coffee still steaming in my hand, as two sheriff cruisers kicked up gravel on my private drive. Behind them, the smug face of Marlene, the president, peeked out from her golf cart like she'd already won. "This property is under HOA jurisdiction," she barked, stepping forward. "You're trespassing." I didn't say a word. I just sipped my coffee, looked past her at the dock her family had been using for decades, and smiled. Because what? Marlene didn't know. What the cops were about to find out was this. I didn't just own the cabin. I owned the entire shoreline, including the water under their precious dock. The cabin had been in my family since 1972. My grandfather built it with his own hands, one log at a time, hauling timber in his rusted-out Ford and shaping the land before there were paved roads or weekenders with yachts. After he passed, it sat quiet for nearly a decade, just memories, and still airing till I finally scraped together enough to leave the city behind and restore it. The lake shimmered in the morning like it remembered him. The pine trees whispered, like they approved of me being back. I'd spent 6 months renovating the inside, doing it all myself, gutting the kitchen, fixing the wiring, sanding the floors until they felt like silk. When it was done, it wasn't just a cabin. It was a sanctuary. Peace I could drink, silence that hugged you. But peace doesn't last when entitlement rolls in on 4 wheels. The first time I met Marlene was 2 days after I moved in full-time. I was on the deck, screwing in the final rail, sweat dripping down my arms. She pulled up in a golf cart, wearing a pink visor, clipboard on her lap like it was a weapon. "This road is for HOA residents only," she said, without so much as, hello, this cabin's been empty for years. "You renting or squatting?" I blinked. "I own it," I said simply. "Title's in my name." She narrowed her eyes. "I don't think so. I'm the HOA president, and this isn't on our owner roster." That was the first flag. I'd done the research. My land, and the 5 acres around it, were never part of the development that sprung up along the lake's edge over the last 15 years. My property line wrapped around a third of the shoreline, including a rocky crescent past the bend, where several docks had mysteriously appeared over the years. I let it slide. "Until now, you might want to double-check your map," I offered. But Marlene didn't like people who corrected her, or challenged the invisible empire. She ran like a dictator with a cup of decaf and a bullhorn. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. First, a formal letter was taped to my mailbox. Unregistered dwelling and non-compliant siding color were scribbled in all caps. Then a fine, $200 for landscaping violations. My lawn was native grass. Their lawns were chemically enhanced carpets. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I wasn't part of the HOA. Then came the more aggressive tactics. One morning, I woke up to find my access road blocked by orange cones and a private road. Residents-only sign bolted into the ground. Another day, 2 men with clipboards wandered onto my deck, snapping pictures like they were appraising the place. I confronted them. "Who the hell are you?" "HOA inspection?" One replied smugly. "Get off my property," I said, walking toward them. Last warning, they left. But Marlene's emails started flooding my inbox the same day. Threats of legal action, demands for compliance. She was building a case bot against what? She didn't even know. The truth was simple. Her entire community was built on land that was leased from an old timber company, and that lease didn't include the shoreline. My grandfather bought it out from under them decades ago. The water line, the beach paths, even the boat dock they'd built, all of it sat squarely on land I now owned. It was in the title deed. It had been overlooked for years until I came back and started living here. I figured she'd back off once she realized she had no leverage. But some people don't know when they've lost. One crisp Thursday morning, I was loading firewood when I heard tires crunch on the gravel again. This time it wasn't a golf cart. 2 police cruisers rolled up slow, lights flashing, no sirens. My stomach sank not from fear, but from rage already boiling over. Out stepped 2 deputies, one young, one older, both cautious. "You the owner of this property?" the older one asked. "Yes, sir," I said calmly, wiping my hands. "We got a call from the HOA about a squatter situation," he said, looking over at my cabin. "Said someone's living here illegally, with no water, electric, or sanitation." I stared at him for a second, then let out a slow, humorless laugh. "Come on inside." They followed me in. Everything was clean, polished, professional, power, filtered water system, internet via satellite. Nothing illegal, no squatters, just me, a mortgage-free property, and a fully documented land deed on the mantle. The young deputy gave a low whistle. "This place is nicer than my house." I handed them the deed, pointed out the property lines on the wall map, and showed them the original documents from the county registry. It was all airtight. The older cop nodded slowly. "Looks like you're not just the owner. Looks like you own more shoreline than the HOA itself." "Exactly," I said. They radioed back. Marlene was still waiting outside, like this was her victory lap. I could see her pacing behind the patrol car. Fake concern smeared on her face. The older deputy walked out and had a word with her. Her expression shifted fast, first confusion, then denial, then disbelief. She pointed, argued, waved her arms, but they just got in the car and left her standing there. I watched her shrink in the rearview mirror, but I wasn't done, because now it was my turn. That night, the lake was still, too still. I sat on the dock with a cold beer, watching moonlight ripple across the water, trying to calm the adrenaline still pulsing through me. Marlene had brought the cops to my doorstep, lied to them, tried to have me dragged off my own land, and for what? Because I didn't play by her HOA fantasy rules. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. The next morning I drove to the county records office, took a number, sat across from a tired clerk named Doug who looked like he hated paper more than anything else in life. I laid out my request, clearly records for the shoreline, dock permits, HOA land boundaries, lease agreements between the developer and the old timber company. I smiled politely, slid a cup of gas station coffee across the desk. He nodded. An hour later, I had everything I needed. Back at the cabin, I spread the documents across my dining table like a general preparing for war. The HOA had been trespassing for years and wittingly building on land they didn't own. Marlene's precious dock. Not only was it unpermitted, it extended 15 feet into my property line. Technically, I could have it dismantled within 72 hours, but that wasn't enough. I needed them to feel it. I sent a certified letter to the HOA's management company, attaching copies of my deed, maps highlighting the shoreline boundaries, and formal notice of encroachment. I gave them 7 days to respond. ICCD, the county, the zoning board, and the lakefront leasing office. I made sure it was neat, polite, and legally bulletproof. 2 days later, a drone buzzed over my property. Not just a quick flyover, it hovered, zoomed in on my truck, then dipped low toward the cabin roof. I followed its path with binoculars and saw where it returned Marlene's second-floor deck. She was watching from a lawn chair like some deranged air traffic controller. I smiled, took out my phone, recorded the whole thing. Trespass by drone. Also illegal in this county. I filed a report that afternoon. By the fourth day, a letter came from the HOA lawyer, some boilerplate nonsense about easements and historical access. They claimed the community had long-standing informal usage rights over the shoreline. They requested a meeting? I declined. Instead, I posted 2 signs on trees at both ends of my land. Asterisk, asterisk, private property, shoreline access restricted. Trespassers will be prosecuted, asterisk, asterisk, that weekend. I woke up to shouting. Voices down by the lake. I slipped on boots and grabbed my phone. A man and woman, probably in their 50s, were standing on the dock with towels and a radio, confused and irritated. I watched from a distance as they read the sign. The man turned and shouted toward the houses across the cove. "You can't do this. This is public lake access." I stepped out onto the rocky slope. "It's not public," I said loudly. "It's mine, and you're trespassing." He turned. "Who the hell are you?" I didn't answer, just kept filming. "You've got no right. My family's been using this dock since 2009. "Then your family's been trespassing since 2009, I replied, walking down the slope. "This dock sits 15 feet into my property line. Check the county registry." He took a step forward, but his wife pulled him back. "We'll call the HOA," she said. "Please do," I said. "Tell Marlene to read my lawyer's letter." I watched him storm off. I could feel the ripples already beginning to spread. By Monday, Marlene had posted an urgent community update on the HOA bulletin board, something about disputed property lines and temporary access limitations. She still wasn't admitting fault. She was trying to spin it, contain it, but people were asking questions now. Neighbors were calling the county. Several even showed up at my door, polite but tense, asking if I really owned the dock, the path, the beach trail behind lot 17. I answered every question the same way, with documentation. Every time, their faces fell just a little. By the end of the week, the HOA lawyer called again, this time, with a different tone. They offered to formally negotiate a shoreline usage agreement and revisit terms of shared access in good faith. I laughed, out loud, then hung up. That night, just before sundown, I walked down to the dock with a clipboard, a camera, and a yellow warning tape. I wrapped it around each post, tied off the end, then I pounded a red sign into the gravel. Asterisk, asterisk, dock closed. Illegal structure on private land, removal pending, asterisk, asterisk. The next morning, all hell broke loose. Marlene came flying down the hill in her golf cart like it was a chariot of fire, slamming on the brakes just feet from where I was, splitting wood. "You can't do that," she hissed. "That dock is community property." "No, Marlene," I said calmly. "That dock is stolen property, and your HOA has been using my land to boost home values for years. That ends now." She stepped closer. "Do you have any idea what kind of lawsuits you're opening yourself up to?" "I'm not opening anything," I said, wiping sawdust from my hands. "You are. You sent cops to evict me from land I own. You built a dock on land you don't own, and you've been billing people for access to property that's legally mine. I could sue you." For the first time, she didn't have an answer, just silence. Cold, seething silence. She backed away, shaking her head. You've made a lot of enemies. Yeah, I said. But I've also made one very good point. As she drove off, tires skidding in the gravel, I felt something settle in my chest, not victory yet, but the sharp edge of it. A reckoning was coming. And Marlene was finally starting to understand she wasn't in charge anymore, because now, the whole Shoreline knew the truth and I was just getting started. First came a guy named Tom, lot 23, then Julie from 17, then Greg, some retired dentist from out of state who barely knew how to work email but somehow found my number. They were nervous, careful, but one by one, they all asked the same question: what happens to our dock usage now? I didn't sugarcoat it. It ends, I said, unless we come to a new agreement. Some were angry, others were stunned. A few apologized, saying they had no idea their dock permits were issued illegally by the HOA, that the association had never mentioned my name, never disclosed the Shoreline wasn't part of the development. Exactly, Marlene had kept them in the dark for years, and now the light was burning straight through her little empire. I wasn't being petty. I wasn't looking for revenge, not at first. But after the harassment, the lies, the cops, the threats, this wasn't just about land anymore. This was about accountability. So I did what any landowner with leverage would do. I got a lawyer, a good one. We drafted official Shoreline lease notices, simple agreements that would allow residents to keep their docks in place for a modest annual fee, nothing extreme, just enough to make a point and establish control. I hand-delivered each one in a manila envelope, along with a highlighted map and a copy of the deed. I even offered discounts to folks who approached me with decency. Most accepted it. Some fumed. Marlene, she lost her damn mind. She called a community meeting, demanded. Every homeowner refused the lease, claimed I was trying to extort the neighborhood. She spun it like I was some outsider, some invader trying to destroy their traditions. But then people started talking about the missing HOA funds, the sketchy dock repairs billed at triple price, the property assessments that mysteriously rose every year, all while Marlene's own lot had new landscaping and a freshly paved driveway, supposedly donated. She'd built her reputation on control. But now, control was slipping. The next move was mine, and I made it big. I hired a contractor, a local guy named Wes with a boat and a bad temper, and I gave him one job: remove the dock. Not all the docks, just one. Marlene's. I gave her notice. 48 hours? No response. So on the third morning, Wes backed his trailer into the water, fired up the winch, and started dismantling. The community watched from porches and decks like it was a live broadcast. Some whispered, some filmed. Marlene came sprinting down the hill barefoot, hair in curlers, screaming about lawsuits and injunctions. Wes just pointed at the permits stapled to the post. Private property, removal authorized by the owner. She collapsed onto the gravel, red-faced, yelling at no one in particular, and I stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the symbol of her power come apart, plank by plank, into the back of a rusted pickup. That dock had stood there for 15 years, and in 15 minutes, it was gone. After that, everything shifted. People stopped listening to her. The whispers turned into conversations, then into accusations. The board she once handpicked started questioning her decisions. One member resigned, then another. HOA meetings went from tightly choreographed speeches to shouting matches and vote recounts. And me. I got calls from the zoning office, the county planner, even the Lake Association asking if I intended to develop the Shoreline or restrict access permanently. I told them no, but I made one thing clear: anyone who wanted access had to go through me. Now, within 2 weeks, the balance of power flipped. Residents started emailing me instead of the HOA. Some thanked me for exposing the truth. Others offered to help maintain the Shoreline if I kept access open. A few even showed up with beers, asking about my grandfather, wanting to know the history of the land. Marlene, meanwhile, went silent. No more flyers, no more emails. Her house sat dark for a few days, and I heard from someone she'd gone to stay with family in the next town over. Embarrassment, maybe, or strategy, didn't matter, because the final nail came from the state. Turns out, when I flagged the dock permits as invalid, the county had to review every structure on the lake. And when they did, they discovered that several docks by the HOA, paid for by homeowner dues, were technically illegal, built without proper inspections, not to code, unsafe. The county issued citations, fines, and guess who the residents blamed? It wasn't me. It was the woman who told them I was a trespasser, who called the cops on a man living in his grandfather's cabin, who tried to bury the truth beneath a stack of fake fines and empty threats. I didn't smile when I read the notice about her resignation. I just nodded once, folded it in half, and tossed it into the fireplace. Later that week, I walked the Shoreline as the sun dipped low, the water glassy and gold. My boots crunched softly on pine needles. I passed the old fire pit where I used to roast marshmallows as a kid, then the stump where Grandpa taught me to whittle. The dock was gone, but peace had returned. Not the quiet kind, the real kind that comes after a storm, when you know the air is clean and the sky finally means it. I looked out over the lake, and for the first time since I came back, it truly felt like home. It was almost poetic how quickly the neighborhood changed once Marlene vanished. The HOA meetings went from tense war zones to empty folding chairs. The bulletin board that used to display her passive-aggressive mandates now sat untouched. The flyers weather-stained and flapping in the breeze like forgotten threats. No one stepped up to fill her shoes. Maybe no one wanted to. Or maybe, after everything, people were just tired of being told what to do by someone who never deserved the authority in the first place. Me. I kept to myself mostly, but the irony was, now that the war was over, people actually wanted to talk. Neighbors who once glared at me from behind their manicured hedges were waving as I drove by. A few came up to the cabin to say thanks or to ask if I'd still allow dock leases next summer. I didn't say yes or no. I just said, we'll see. If you enjoyed that story and want more epic comebacks, real justice, and power moves that leave you cheering, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to see karma in action. More stories like this are coming. Don't miss the next one. I wasn't holding a grudge, not anymore, but I wasn't rushing to erase the past either. These people had stood by while Marlene tried to destroy me. A few apologized, genuinely, some didn't, but they all understood now who owned the Shoreline, not just legally, but fundamentally. Then came the letter, not from the HOA this time, from a real estate developer, big name, out of state. They offered to buy the entire Shoreline, 7 figures. We'll preserve community access, they claimed. Minimal disruption. They even dangled a consulting fee if I agreed to help them expand the lakefront into a luxury resort concept. I read it 3 times, then laughed. They didn't get it. None of them really did. This land wasn't just dirt and trees and water. It was a legacy. My grandfather's sweat lived in every plank of the cabin. My childhood echoed in the rocks along the shore. And when Marlene tried to erase me from it, she awakened something far deeper than a grudge. She awakened purpose. I declined the offer, politely, but firmly. Told them the land wasn't for sale, now or ever. That same week, the HOA board tried to hold a re-election. I showed up, quietly, standing in the back of the community center while they stumbled through their agenda. Without Marlene, it was chaos. No direction, no plan, just awkward silence between motions and embarrassed shrugs. Someone stood and asked if the board planned to challenge the Shoreline ownership. Another asked if dues would go down now that the dock insurance policy was void. No answers. Then a man I barely knew, a guy named Lewis, mid-60s, with deep-set eyes and a sun-scorched neck, stood up and said something I'll never forget. I think we've forgotten what a community is, he said. We let one person turn neighbor against neighbor, and we tried to push out the only man who actually belongs here. That cabin was built before any of us got here. We don't own this lake. We're just renting time on it. No one clapped, but no one disagreed either. After that, the meeting fizzled. No new elections, just murmurs, and heads down, and people filing out quietly. I left before the lights were shut off. Later that night, I got a knock at my door. Marlene, she stood there in jeans and a hoodie, stripped of her pageant posture, her eyes tired but burning with something. Maybe shame? Maybe anger? Probably both. I came to apologize, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't move, just waited. I got caught up in control, she continued. I thought the HOA gave me purpose, something to run, something to fix. But I turned it into something toxic, and I treated you like a threat when you were just ... home. She looked down. For once, no clipboard, no smirk. Just an old woman with a long list of regrets. I know you'll never trust me, she said. I wouldn't either, but I had to say it. I nodded once, then slowly closed the door. She didn't knock again. I didn't need revenge anymore. Not after the dock came down. Not after the board collapsed. Not after the truth cut through every layer of her empire. That was enough. What mattered now was keeping the land right. Whole, wild, honest. By fall, the lake grew quiet again. Most of the weekenders went back to the cities. The docks sat empty. The trees turned golden red, the wind cooler each morning. I spent my day splitting firewood and fishing off a flat rock Grandpa used to call his throne. Sometimes I'd look across the water and see someone on a deck, just watching, not hostile, not curious, just still. Maybe, just maybe, they finally understood. One morning I found something left on the edge of my property, a wooden sign, carved and sanded smooth. It read, Lake Haven Shoreline, protected and preserved. There was no note, no signature, just the words, left leaning against a pine. I set it near the dock trail and sealed it with wet coat. It fit there, like it had always belonged. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and painted the water in firelight, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, just listening. No sirens, no shouting, just wind through pine needles, soft waves lapping rock, and a loon calling in the distance. The battle was over. The Shoreline was mine. And peace had finally come home.